We're going to be working on Chapter 32 exercises tonight, and we're going to tackle the very first one, which is 32.1. Let's read the instructions here. It says, access and update a staff table. Write a program that views, inserts, and updates staff information stored in a database, as shown in Figure 32.27a. So it's going to look like this little simple form here. The View button displays a record with a specified ID. The Insert button inserts a new record. The Update button updates the record for the specified ID. The staff table is created as follows. Now, the thing that we should be aware of, if you completed that exercise, and it wasn't actually a formal exercise that was graded, but if you completed the activity that I did in this video, so if you go and you watch this video here in our course shell, so this is Unit 4, and I'm pretty certain I do that in these videos as well, but basically establishing a connection to Chrono. So I have making sure you have the database, that you can connect to it, and get it to work. You should have that database table created. So for example, here I give you a link to the text that was the query that created that whole database. And if I do a quick search here for staff, you're going to see that this entry here should match up with what our book says. So there's a little bit of planning that's going on here, so you can see that it indeed is the same thing. So if you succeeded completing the activities we did in this video, then you are all set to do the work that we have here. You do not need to create a database or create a table. It's already there. We're just going to attach to it, right? So that's actually one big thing off the checklist right off the bat. We did that in class last time. Yeah. Yeah, and when we did that, the program that we created was called this. It was called Simple JDBC Java, and that is in our book. That's in chapter. It's not an exercise. And the whole point of this one, if you remember, was to load up the driver, get a connection to the database, create a SQL statement, gather the results, and then output the results so that we can see them. And then finally, which is a proper thing to do, you close your database connection. Now, we are going to use that approach to begin this program. So we need to have all that same information in there. In fact, what makes a lot of sense, and if you think back to maybe your PHP days, where you would write a database connection script there, right? And once you've created the database connection script, you can actually just go ahead and put that in an external file and just pull it in whenever you need it, right? Or you could write a method or a function and just load it dynamically on the fly. And that might not be a bad way to proceed. So we are going to actually borrow some of the code from this assignment, and I'm sorry, I keep saying assignment, from this activity, and borrow it to build what we're about to build next. So why don't we begin by creating a new class file. All right, not what I wanted to do. I wanted a simple right click there, create a new class. Let's call this exercise 32_1. We'll get our main method in there. All right, and then as I was just telling you, we are going to go ahead and steal that database connection stuff, why recreate it. We will need the import statement at the top, so let's copy that. We also know that for all our GUI application, we have to do what? Extends application. Then I'm going to do a control space here. Add the JavaFX library. The other thing that we're going to want to do is start copying over some of this database code. So If you want, you can hold on to all of these statements here that tell you that the driver's loaded and the connection's established. That stuff just prints to the console. The user will never see it because we're writing a GUI application. But it's useful to us as the programmers just to make sure things are working. It gives us a trace, basically, of the activities. So let's just go ahead and copy those few lines. And I'm probably going to strip the comments out of it. So I'm going to leave that stuff in there. I'll leave the connection information in there, the connection string, and the little message that's going to go to the console. Now, what I would like to do, if you remember, is I would like to bundle this stuff all together into a method that we can call upon as we need it. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call it initialize database. Doesn't need any parameters passed to it, but it does need to have curly braces wrapped around it. Now, the other thing that is really a good habit here, and I know that my layout here is very messy, so I'm going to get everything tabbed into the right positions. And boy, it doesn't like that, does it? Well, part of what is happening here, do you notice what the underline is doing? It says unhandled exception type, meaning here we are, we're going to run an application that needs to connect to a database. It's going to be an essential component of it. So what happens if it doesn't connect? Without a way to handle the exception, an exception being an error that would be thrown if the connection fails, the whole program will crash. It will just stop dead in its tracks. That is not acceptable. So this is where we do a little bit of our error handling, and what we're going to do, we're going to set up a try-catch statement. So I'm going to set up a try, and then what we're going to do inside of that try is we're going to basically bundle all of this stuff together. So I'm going to put in a closing curly bracket there. So it's going to try all of these statements. Then if it fails, we will do a catch. And this is the syntax you're going to use here. You're going to type exception, and then you're going to type some sort of a variable name there. That's the one we usually use. And then we're going to do an output message of some sort. Now, for our sake as developers, we can just do a system out print line, right? And we can just say something like connection failed, or maybe even better yet, database connection failed. However, the user might appreciate, and I'm putting in a little comment here for the user, and I'm going to leave it commented for now, and I'll tell you why in just a second. We want to do an output for the user that maybe says something a little more descriptive. So for example, I could actually write a string of some sort, and I'm just going to actually compose the string first. So I'm going to say basically the same thing. Database connection failed. And then I'm going to concatenate to it whatever the exception error is. So it's going to say connection failed, and then it's going to give me some sort of like a mistake. It's going to give me some sort of feedback. However, if I'm going to display that to the user in a GUI program, I need to have some sort of a construct that I'm going to create that's going to indicate, or that's going to give me a place to basically put that string. Yeah, a box. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to actually probably choose to do it within Well, I guess I could go into a text box, but I'm thinking in terms of the way the application looks on the screen here. See at the very top where it says record found? We're probably going to create a label to do that. See, it's not in the box. So I'll create a label called status. And then we'll put the results into that particular box. So thinking ahead that I'm going to create a graphical component called label. And if you guys remember from your very first intro to programming class, you did Visual Studio and you did labels and text boxes and buttons and whatever. And then you learned a naming convention. I'm going to actually follow that naming convention. And the thing that we would teach people is to type LBL to indicate that it's a label. And that's actually very subjective. You don't have to do that. And then I'm going to call it status. And then there's a method that goes with these graphical components called setText that we can just drop this bit of text into and add a semicolon. And for right now, it's going to be throwing an error for a number of reasons. And if you hover, it says cannot be resolved because I have not created it. Okay, so I'm going to basically ignore that error for the moment because I know that I'm going to create it. So when I was doing this, I'm trying to think ahead. I'm creating a database connection script. I'm putting it in a try-catch block. That's to catch any errors that might happen. We don't want the program to halt. We'd rather just give them an error on the screen and not have it work. And then they can exit gracefully. All right. So this method, we're going to just push down to the bottom of the program somewhere. Kind of like what we're going to do with the main method. And what do we do with the main method? We just do launch args, and that's basically it, right? Now, another thing that we need when we're working on a program like this is we do need, because it's a graphical program, we do need to do our little primary stage, and we need to do the override, and that's part of what's going on here. It says, exercise 32.1 must implement the inherited abstract method application start stage. So let's go ahead and do that. It adds that in. All right, and the other thing that we'll want to do, I'm just making sure it didn't, dropped it all the way to the bottom. So we're going to grab the stage, the code for the stage, and we're just going to move it up here to the top where we're more accustomed to working with it. Oops. Boy, that didn't work right, did it? All right, it looks like I have to do that process again. I added it to the bottom, and I think what happened is I didn't cut it, I deleted it. All right, that's much better. This part of the program, the part where the stage is, this is where we're going to put a majority of our code to create the visual elements, to do some of the actions. But a lot of the stuff that we might do might kind of sit independent of the rest of the program. So for example, if we're doing read and write to the database, it might make sense to separate those out in methods that we call and just drop them down to the bottom of the program like we do with this initialized database thing. So we're only going to call those things as we need them when a person hits a button, right? So we don't want it just all sitting there in the program body. We'll create a method for it, and then we'll trigger it with an event handler. All right. So I think an easy thing to do first is to go back and let's create the visual interface. Let's take a look at the stuff we have here. I'm going to get just a little bit of a zoom so I can see it clearly. All right, so we already discussed the fact that this will be a label called status. Then I say that we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 labels, right? So we're going to need 8 labels. We need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 text boxes. Is that right? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And maybe I miscounted the labels then. And then we need 4 buttons. We also need the graphical containers for them. You know, panes and grid panes and H boxes and all that kind of stuff. So I think a good thing to do is let's start creating all of those objects. So the way that I'm going to choose to do this is external to the stage, the primary stage method, the start method. I'm actually going to create a bunch of privates, kind of like I would if I was creating a class that would create an object, for example. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want these components to be available to everything in the program, not just the stuff that's running inside the start method, but also all the methods that I'm going to choose to place outside the start method, like I already have with the database thing. So if I were to create, let's say, buttons and labels and put them inside this block of code, they are not accessible to this, but I need them to be. So you see the logic there? All right, so I'm going to come in here, and let's actually start with the buttons. And then my encouragement to use is to use the prefixes that you learned in Intro to Programming. And very subjective, you don't have to, but that's just a strong recommendation. So we need view, insert, update, and clear. So first one I'm going to call view, and that's going to be a new button. We can pass to it a parameter of text, which is the text that will appear on the button. So given the fact that this is repetitive, insert, update, and clear. Insert, update, and clear. And clear. Okay, so we got 4 buttons. We haven't put them anywhere yet, but we have 4 buttons. We also are noticing here the red underlines are indicating that we do need to import the JavaFX library that supports the buttons. So I did that, and you can see that it's been added to our libraries here at the top. All right, then we also determined that we needed the labels and text fields, right? All right, my inclination is, let's start with the text fields just because that's what I did in the past. Yes, I'm cheating, I'm looking at my old code. But I want to be here all night doing. So I'm going to create a text field. All right, and once again, what I'm going to suggest is that you use that convention, so I'm going to call it txt, and then we're going to have ID, right? That's our first one, and then we're going to do new text field. This can have empty parentheses. We don't want anything to populate in there. Once again, let's hover. Add the JavaFX library, not the AWT, JavaFX. Then we're going to take this line and we're going to copy it. And I guess I should go back and count again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's 2, 3. All right. And then I know from the graphic as well last, first, middle. And then from there we went address, city, state. And the last one is telephone. I'll just call it phone. That works for me. We also know that we need to create some labels. So the first one we can obviously start with is we can create a label for that status field that we created. Now typically with the label you could send text to it like we did with the buttons, but I actually want it to be blank because what I'm going to use that for is a way to like put messages on the screen. Record updated, deleted, or whatever the case may be. Just kind of a handy indicator. So it'll start out blank. This also needs a library added. JavaFX library for label. And then since we've done a bunch of stuff here, I'm going to make sure I do a Control-S to save. Don't want to lose any of my work. In the past, sometimes when I've done this, I will have taken all the labels I need on the page and just declare them here. In other circumstances, just to demonstrate on-the-fly instantiation. I was having this discussion with my students out in Burlington yesterday, that sometimes you can make declarations and pass parameters to certain methods, and one of the parameters that you can pass is the instantiation of an object in place. So what I'm going to do is I'll demonstrate that technique to you, but I'm actually going to opt to pre-create all the labels just because I think it's a better organization, but I'll demonstrate instantiation in place. And I think you guys have probably seen this before, but I just want to make sure that you're aware of it. So we have the 1, which we already created. We need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more labels, right? All right. I think I copied this, but if not, let's copy it again. All right, so I got 8 more labels, and I'm assuming I'm going to follow suit with all the naming, right? So I am going to go back and add text, so if you're thinking I'm forgetting. Am I missing something here? Oh, ID. I didn't put in ID. Now, of course, I want it to be just so I'm actually going to move this line so it follows the same sequence as the appearance on the page. Just easier to find stuff. And then inside each one of these labels, as I'm instantiating, I'm going to include the text that the label will contain. So for example, ID will be called ID. And I do want to try to copy what they have here. And I'm just noticing that they have last name first, don't they? Trying to throw us off, I think. Yeah, I could always use coffee, absolutely. All right. Well, they're doing last name first, so I better follow suit. All right, so here we have all our controls created and ready to be added. Now, the next part in my mind that's good to do is basically create the graphical nodes that we're going to put things into, the H boxes or V boxes or whatever we're deciding to use. So what I'm thinking, and that we haven't done really that much with H box and V boxes in our exercises, although I know the chapters are pretty heavy on it. So what I'm thinking is that we can create one V box that's going to hold everything. This is my vision, okay? Just to try some different stuff. Then we'll create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 H boxes to hold each one of the rows of information. And this, I'm doing this just to basically organize everything. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of text. Okay, now I'm thinking I'm even thinking in a different way now. Grid pane might work. Well, grid pane would force stuff into columns and rows. And if you look at this here, that doesn't exactly fit into columns and rows. Yeah. What's that? Flow pane might work too. I mean, honestly, it's so subjective. I can kind of accomplish the same thing using so many different approaches. Let me give you one that you might not even think of. All right, so I'm gonna get to. You guys need coffee? All right, fine. I'll take a break and we'll come back. Coffee break. Let's continue on our program here. I think that a real good place to go next is, once again, still working on all the visual components. Let's go ahead and put in all the stuff that helps the stage and the scenes to display. So all the typical things that we do. And I know there's going to be some libraries we need to add here. And then we're going to put something inside those parentheses. First we have to figure out what it is. Let's set our title. And what is this going to be? Exercise 32.1. And then let's set our scene. And we're going to place our scene inside of our set scene. And then we also want to show the stage. And the command for that is just show. All right, we need to add a library for scene. And all our libraries are there. Now we need something to put here, and we're kind of going to go back to our discussion about what kind of shapes and boxes we want to use. So I'm actually going to opt to use a border pane, believe it or not. Probably not what you would expect, but maybe it is. Because really what I'm thinking in my head as I look at this, remember a border pane has a top, a bottom, a left, a right, and a center, right? Don't have to use all those regions. So what I'm thinking is that clearly the buttons could go in the bottom, maybe the label that's the status could go on the top, and the center section could be a V box that holds 5 H boxes. That's my target. Okay, you got that? Okay, I'll just code it. Maybe it'll click in a little bit better just by doing that. So let's continue creating the border pane. So we're going to say new border pane. let's go ahead and add the libraries here. Let's hover JavaFX. All right. And since we're calling that border pane, let's go ahead and set inside that pane. We already decided we're going to set top, right? I don't have anything to put in there yet. I will. It won't like that I'm not putting anything in there, but I'm just kind of getting the structure in place, and then I'll populate it. We'll also set center. Same situation. Just insists on putting it in there. And then we'll set the bottom also. So ultimately what we're going to put inside the scene is the pane, which happens to be a border pane. All right, so kind of building sort of from the bottom up, I am now going to create the very top. Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. Do I need to put the label at the top instead of an H box? You know, I could actually just drop it in right here. And I can just say LBL status and be done with it. We'll see how that looks. I might change it. All right. The other thing that we're going to do is we said we were going to create a VBox. And let's just call it VBox. And let's put the spacing element in there just to give a little bit of breathing space. And then, remember, my thought is I'm going to create 5 H boxes. So this is going to be kind of a repetitive process here. So H box, and I think I'm just going to have to number them. So I'm going to say H box 1 equals new H box. On all of these, I'm going to put in 5 pixel spacing. Now, of course, you see we got libraries to add. We may as well just do that right away. Add the VBox library. Add the HBox library. And we know we're going to do the HBox, because if all this stuff is in one VBox, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going to do that statement 5 times. And then we're just going to adjust the numbers. Now, given the fact that I'm going to be putting H boxes inside the V box, that stuff's all going to go in the center. So in the center section, I can put in my V box. I'm also going to need to have a way to get all my buttons in there. So in this case, I guess I need to create one more H box, but that one will sit separate. I won't put it in the center. I'll put that in the bottom. So let's just go ahead and create it. H box, and I'll just call it 6. All right. Everybody with me so far? And that HBox 6 is going to go at the very bottom. Oh, no, it's supposed to be set bottom. Good catch, thank you. Control S to save your work. Don't lose what you've done so far. Now, you see what I'm doing here is I'm kind of structurally building from the outside in. Stage, scene, border pane, all the little pieces. So if I'm putting like all those pieces inside of each other, this was a standalone little piece, this is a standalone piece, but VBox has a bunch of other stuff in it. So I also need to put the stuff inside the VBox, right? So we need to do something like this. I'm doing an add all here. And then what are we going to add there? Well, we're going to add all the H boxes 1 through 5. That's correct. H box 1. All right, now still working on all the visual elements. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start taking each one of these sections and putting stuff in it. So for example, with the HBox 1, I need to start creating the stuff that's going to go inside there. So to do that, I need to decide what stuff is going to go into HBox 1. So what I'm actually going to do this like right after each declaration, just so they're all kind of bundled together. So I'm going to do HBox 1, and once again I'm going to do a get children. And what am I going to throw at it? Well, I'm going to do add. Obviously I'm going to do add, and I'm going to do all, because I know there's going to be more than one thing. In that very first HBox, that would be this line here, it's going to have the ID label and text field. So that's what we're going to add here. We're going to add label, ID, I think I called it, right? It's kind of sad I don't remember it from 1 minute to the next. And then txt ID, right? And then to follow suit, I'm going to do the same with each of these. So in the second line, we have last, first, and middle. Need a little bit of copy paste here to save some time, although it's not always a time saver. So then we're going to do label, last name, text field, last name, label, first name, text field, first name. What else is left? Middle initial, so LBL, middle, and TXT. So I call that middle also. And that should do it for that line. And really, if you want it to be not wrapped so far over, do something like that, just to kind of keep it all together. All right, in the third row, it's just going to be the address. So this will be HBox 3. So we'll do LBL address, TXT address. You guys remember when I was telling you earlier about instantiating in place, right? So for example, with address for a label, right, I created it up here, and I did that for a reason, very good reason. But I could have just as easily, right here, actually done the declaration. I could have said new, and not even bother giving it a name. And this is the reason why we would do it, is I would just do something new label address. Okay, I'm not naming it, I'm not calling it, I'm just doing it on the fly and forcing it in there. That's absolutely fine. It's akin to kind of doing an anonymous function of sorts. It's like you're not really naming it, you're just using it. So I'm not saying that you should do it that way, I'm just giving you the idea that it can be done that way, but that's not what we opted to do earlier. And I think ultimately this is probably a little bit easier to read.
really that we needed to either set information or get information from the number of methods when you did it that way, that would be available?
No, it wouldn't because it doesn't have a name. Right, because all we were doing is instantiating it and putting it in there. We weren't naming the object. So you're right. If we needed to put data into it or pull data from it or change it, it wouldn't be available to us to do that. Okay. So there are some limitations to it, but there are cases where it doesn't really matter because you're just doing it. All right. So the next line is going to be city, I believe, city and state. And then finally, this one's going to be phone, right? The HBox 6, that's the one that's going to go in the bottom pane, and that's going to hold my buttons. So same approach, but what we're adding is going to be BTN, see if I can remember them, view. All right, I forgot. Insert, update, and clear. Okay, so now we have created all the visual elements. Everything's on the screen. We should be able to actually execute this now and see what it looks like. So let's go ahead and run it. All right, that's what we've got. All right, not the prettiest thing in the world, right? But it's all there. So we can tweak it a little bit. I mean, really, what we have here, like the center section doesn't look any better or worse than what they have. Really, the only thing that I'm seeing that's kind of off is maybe the fact that the middle initial field is too large, right? The other thing I'm noticing is that everything is touching the edges. What else is a problem? That label at the top, that might be a little too small. So those are like, frankly, they're pretty minor things, honestly. But for example, this H box that's at the bottom, so the one which is number 6 for us, we could center that, right? So we could do H box, and it should be, I gotta have the right number in there, H box 6. Set alignments, and what do we want to do? Position center. All right, let's run it again. So we're just going to make a couple of tweaks. I really don't want to kind of spend my whole night doing this. I'd rather get to the part that does the logic of working with the database. All right, that's in the center. That's better. Can we agree? Now I'm also thinking that there's so much that I can do to kind of clean it up. The other thing I'm thinking is here I might be able to pass in like a value like that. Oh, it's not liking that, is it? All right, I'll remove it. I'm just thinking of spacing is basically what I'm doing. All right. Now changing that middle initial thing to be the right size. Does anybody have a clue as to how we might do that? Okay, well that's happening in HBox 2, right? You can. There's a certain way that you can actually determine how wide it is, and that's like the column size. So the command. Yes, set preference column count is the one. So if you read, you would have encountered it. So for the middle initial, I'm going to say txt middle dot set pref column count. There it is. And I'm going to set it to 1 because we're only really expecting one character in there. All right, once again, let's run it. Okay, that's better, right? All right, we're not perfect here, but I get that. But you know what? This is, in my mind, this is good enough for now. Let's get the mechanics working next. And then once we have the mechanics working, then we can pretty it up all we want. All right, so we have all the graphical components in place. One thing that we're going to want to do is when the application loads, we want to be able to get all the components, populate them all, put them on the scene and the stage and show them, right? Then we can go ahead and we can establish our database connection. Did I misspell that somewhere? Oh, I sure did. All right. Then the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up each one of those buttons so that they're ready to do something. So we're going to set up some event handlers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do btn view. Actually, let's just list them first so I remember. Was it insert, update, and clear? All right, and then for each one of these, we're going to do a set on action, and then we're going to put in our little lambda event handler, and then we're going to run a method. I have a brilliant idea. Why don't we call the method, which we're going to create, by the way. So these methods are going to be all the database interactions. All right. Why don't we call the one for view, view. All right, and I think you already get the pattern here. So I'm just going to do some copy pasting. And yes, I know I haven't created it yet, but we'll do a view, an insert, an update, and a clear. Save your work, don't lose your work. Okay, the other thing that we should do preliminarily is whenever we run a query, remember back to this example here, the simple one where we just connected to the database. We put in our database driver, we establish a connection, and then we set up a little construct that allows us to hold a statement that we're going to populate with a query. So basically what statements are for is SQL statements. All right. Then we're also going to need a result set to pull stuff back to. At the very least, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this. And I can actually close that and that. And I'm going to need to create SQL statements, but I'm not going to put them within the start stage. I'm going to actually create a generic little element here that sits outside of all of it. Once again, this is going to be a private, not available to outside classes. And I'm not going to actually add the last part to it. I'm just going to call it private statement, or another common abbreviation for this is something like this. So let's just do that. So what this means is I'm not attaching it to the connection right away. The connections are going to happen every time we run a query. Okay, so conceptually what we're doing now is we're going to have buttons. I'm going to hit a button, and depending on what that button's intended to do, it will then launch a query that will execute the action of that button. So let's try to get to the point where we're building that part of it. The next thing that we have to do is start building all these little methods. We'll take them one at a time. We'll create view first. And I'm going to put that right below initialize database. And once again, this is going to be a private. It's available only to the application. We're not returning anything per se, so it's going to be a void. And it's going to be called view. Now, with view, in order to see something, we're going to have to run a query, right? And the query to view stuff is pretty simple, really. Let's read the instructions just for a second. Views, inserts, updates staff information stored in a database. The view button displays a record with a specified ID. So here's the conception of how it's going to work. I'm going to come here, I'm going to type in an ID number, and then I'm going to click view. Then it's going to find that record. Okay, that's the point. So we would have to write a SQL statement that's going to do that. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, the first thing that we're going to do is inside this new method that we created is let's start building a SQL statement. To do that, we're going to need to create a string. And why not call it a query, since that's what we're building. And then we're going to just actually type out a query. We already know the table name is staff. And you see how far I'm taking this now, right? At this point, I'm going to have to diverge a little bit, because we're going to need to insert into this statement the syntax necessary to pull the information from the text field that we're typing it into and then feed it into the SQL statement. So really the whole SQL statement has to be wrapped with double quotes, right? But we can't get that all in there efficiently, so we're going to have to, I'm going to go to the next line here, we're going to have to do a little concatenation. And then if I were, okay, conceptually here, if I was to just type this in plain text, I might type in where ID is 1, 2, 3. I would encapsulate it in single quotes, and I would be done with it. But now we have to take wherever this 1, 2, 3 is, and we got to insert into it the correct Java language to pull the stuff from the form. That's our. Say that again. Along those lines, absolutely. So let me go ahead and get rid of these extraneous characters. So the first part of it here is I'm going to put in the single quote. You guys catching this? And then I'm going to concatenate to it whatever I called the ID text field. So it was txt ID, right? But what are we grabbing from it? We're getting the text, and it's not just as simple as that. That's a method, so it needs parentheses. But we have this issue, and I'm going to show you, this is a handy little thing, I know they show it in the chapter, that one problem that we often see in databases is people will enter in information. And an ID field is numeric. So if I type a number, accidentally hit a space, and add that to the database, or try to, it's going to throw an error. Because it will handle the numbers, but not the space. A string also kind of does the same thing. But it's not a good idea to have those extraneous leading or trailing spaces inside of a form field, because that happens. So we have to write code to kind of basically eliminate that possibility, and the command for it is trim. And then I'm going to basically do the same thing again with the single quote and end the statement. So this is going to allow us to type something into the form field that's got the text ID. It's going to get the text. We're going to trim away leading and trailing spaces, and then we're inserting it into our SQL statement, ready to send off to the database. All right, next thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to do a try-catch block here. Same reasons we were doing before, because if we try a query and it doesn't work, you don't want your application to stop running. So this is the path here. We're going to basically create now a result set. Call it whatever you will. RS, result set, results, whatever works for you. And now we're going to go, actually come back up to the top here, where we created a statement, right? This is meant to hold SQL statements. So now we're going to use it. Back down here. So this is going to be the statement, which is going to execute a query, and we're going to throw in the string that we just created up above, which is called query. And that's really the part that's going to do a lot of the work for us. Now, we also need to be able, once that result set comes in, we need to be able to push that back to the form. So now we got another step that we have to take here. All right. Let me just build out a little bit of code here just to kind of make sure we don't lose our place. I'm going to put in a catch too. And in this case, the type of exception that we're going to have is going to fall into the category of a SQL exception. So it's not Java that's throwing the exception, it's SQL that's throwing the exception. And once again, we're going to use EX as an identifier. And then inside here, we're going to use that status field that we created to basically display the message. We're going to do a subtext. And then what's going to be inside there? We're going to say query failed. And then we can be polite and maybe add the error code if that's what you choose to do. You don't have to do that part of it, but that's considered, good practice. Now, I do need to do something here, though, which is basically push text to the form. Now, here's the problem. I need to be able to do this in a way that's going to retrieve the information and write it back to that text field. And to do it in a fashion that will work in all scenarios. Not only that, but hold on a second. If I type in an ID number for somebody, let's say your ID is 123. I type that into the form field, I click view. It's going to go into the database, hopefully, find that entry, 123, and then what is it going to return to us? All the fields, right? And then, regardless of really any of the actions that we're going to be taking, we always want to see the result in all the fields. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to write a separate method here. So I'm going to write another private void, and I don't know what you want to call it. Should we call it load fields, something like that? Does that work for you? All right. And then we're going to do a couple of things here. First of all, what are we going to be loading? We're going to be loading a result set. So that's the data type that's going in. We can, once again, we can use RS as an abbreviation for it, for the actual name of the result set. But in addition to just using the result set, because here we go again. What happens if the stuff that's coming back doesn't have the right stuff in it? Do we want our program to crash? So what we're getting here is a little bit of schooling and try-catch at the same time. So I'm actually going to allow this to throw an exception. And I've got to make sure I do this right. This is a SQL exception. You want this on your test? Is that what you said? Right, you can try. That's right. Okay. You can say, okay, you failed because, right? All right. Now, some of this is stuff that you hopefully read in the chapter, so I kind of make the assumption that you're not coming into this cold. What I'm really setting up here in this structure is I'm saying that if the result set has a next item, here's the logic here, all right? So if there's only one result, it's going to recognize that there is a result, and if it's the first one, it's still the next one for us. So is there one there that we can pull from? So it finds it, it's true. Then we're going to go ahead and load up all the text fields. So now we're really just going to be doing something like this. We're going to do, but it's going to be with text fields. So we're going to say txt, what are we going to set? We're going to set last name. We're going to set its text. And we are going to pull the text from the result set, and we are going to get the string. Now, there is also some parameters that you can throw in here, and you can see as I'm hovering, it says parameters. Column index, the first column is 1, the second column is 2. So what do you think? What do you think I should do? Column 3. First one's always 1. Yeah, you're not confusing it. You're actually remembering it. Because the first result is going to come in as a 1, right? But what's in the 1 field? What's in the first column? The ID. No, the ID is in the first column. So we're not worried about the first column. So keep in mind here, what a result set is we're pulling back a database record, and that database record has all the columns, and the first column for us is the ID field. But we don't need to pull that one back because we just typed it in. So we're going to go to the second column. Right? Here we're not counting starting with 0, we're counting with 1. So get string in column 2. And then really what's going to happen here is we're just going to be repeating this process for all the fields on the page. And I think it was something like that. And then I can tell you right off the bat that this is going to be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Was there 8 total? Does that sound right? The ID is number 1, but we've already in essence typed that value in. All right, so now we just need to go through and change these. First name, this one was middle, this is address, city, state, and phone. The other thing that would be nice, we created that little label status field at the top, is that we might do something like this, where we'll set the text for this also. and then maybe just say something like record found. So what happens if there is no next record? Oh, and I'm sorry, this needs to be a method. That's why it's underlined. We could do an else. And the else could just be, once again, a status label thing. So either the record's found or the record's not found, right? So now what's going to happen, now that we've created this method that's going to handle pushing the text back to the fields, now we're going to put that method here. Now remember, the reason that we're doing this is because that procedure of pushing the text back is going to happen with all the different buttons we press. So it's just a matter of kind of leveraging that. So all we're going to put in this spot now is we're just going to say load fields. And what are we loading those fields with? The result set that we just generated. So conceptually, we run the view command. We type in a number. Let's actually look at it. We'll type in a number. We'll click view. That will come down here, and it will basically build the query statement. It will retrieve the text from the ID field, get rid of those extra spaces, trailing and leading. And then it's going to take that query and pump it into a query, execute query command that then populates a result set. We're going to take that result set that we pulled back and we're going to throw it to this method, which is going to pull it out of the result set and push it into all the right text boxes. That might just be one record, or it might be many. That's what the next is all about. Now, we have a little bit more work to do. All right, so we were just talking here off video. We paused for a second, and we have still a little bit more work to do because we need to still write all of these methods. And I, put out the thought there, which is the easiest one to write. And I think clear is certainly the easiest one to write. So that's the one we're going to do next. Let's try to knock that one out because it'll literally take just a few minutes. So once again, we're going to do private void. It's going to be called clear. And what's the clear method going to do? Well, notice here we're like pushing text in, but what if I just put no? No, this is just clearing the form. But we are missing one field, or one text box, which is the ID, right? So there's another method. All right, now we have two left to write. And if you think about what these last two are doing, they're not all that dissimilar from each other, really. The one command would take information that we type into a form and insert it into the database, right? So we're not selecting information, we're inserting a record. And you guys know how to do that with a SQL statement. With update, what's the command in SQL to change a record? I won't tell you. You can think about it in your own head and tell me if you remember. It's called it's update. Yeah. The reason that these were named the way they were is so that you guys would remember your SQL. Yeah. Now that it might not be really the best name for it, but that's what we an insert statement in SQL and an update statement in SQL. Okay. So let's start by doing the insert. All right. So let's write that one. We are going to be starting with a table that's empty. Now, how do I know that? Because I went, and I told you as we were starting out, that we have these databases are pre-built. If we got that one sample assignment, exercise, Bill, it built out this table for us, and you notice there's a staff table. The staff table, okay, so now it's, all right, the staff table is empty. That's right. The staff table is empty. The structure is there. See? Oh, this one's got email on it too. Did I miss that?
The exercise that does say email, but in here you don't have one.
Well, how do you like that? And see, I'm just looking at the pictures, right?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, it doesn't. So it does have it here, though.
I know that's what I was saying.
Yeah, it's in SQL statement, but it's not actually on the pane that we're building.
All right. I think we have to build it. I think we have to build it.
It's not.
No, let's and say we did because we actually did. I mean, at this point, you guys should be familiar enough with this structure where it's not a really big deal to add it, right? And then, of course, we're going to need a label, too. No, what we're going to do is we'll put this in an HBox 5 is what we'll do. All right, so that's going to go right after phone. We'll do LBL email and TXT email. And then there's another spot where we were just working with our load fields thing that we created. So here we should do TXT email. And see, once you have the pattern established, it's no big deal. So would this be column 9? And if I go back to PHP my admin, here's where the column numbers come from, you guys, if you're wondering. See how they're listed? All right, back to Eclipse.
So where did you put the email? You put it right at the end after phone? For
Yep. Yep, that's correct.
Upload fields.
Oh yeah, and of course if we're clearing stuff, we have to clear the email too. All right, and let's go back to building that method that we were just talking about. So we were going to create one called...
Isn't it insert?
Did I already start it? It's pretty sad when you don't
It's
remember.
because they're the call. That's how we get them.
Yeah, right here. Oh, thanks. Yes, that is right there, isn't it? All right. Once again, we're going to have to build a string that's going to build our query. So let's just call it insert query. And it's going to look something like this. What's the command to insert? What table are we inserting into? Staff. And then if you guys remember your SQL, you can do something like this, where you call out all the columns, right? Now, I'm kind of cheating because I have this kind of already written, but you need to make sure that you match up with what's here. And I see that already that's wrong. See that? That's a lowercase l. The only uppercase letters here are the first one. Yeah, except for that camel case going on there. So last is ID. Oh, yeah, ID is lowercase too. Good catch. Now it makes me want to check my other query up here.
Yeah, we got a pretty
Yeah, it sure is, isn't it? It's all those little details that'll drive you crazy. Or sane, depending on your perspective, I guess.
Yeah, it's in the SQL
And then
statement. But
MI
it's not
address
actually
and
on
say telephone email.
the pane that we're building.
address.
I didn't forget, I was just testing you. Now, because this line is getting long, I'm actually going to do this, you guys. I'm going to do a little concatenating here. And I encourage you to do the same. And then we would need a parenthesis here. And then we would need to say values. And then we'd start the next part of our SQL statement. And here's where it gets a little hairy. Because the stuff that we're going to be passing in needs to be in the form of, let's say that I was actually typing in an ID. It would have to be single quotes, 1, 2, 3, single quote, right? Then a comma, and then if the last name was Smith, and then a comma, that's how the data has to go in. Here's the catch though. Everything that's in between those single quotes has to be something that we're pulling in from a field and needs to be concatenated to the string. So this is where your syntax is super picky. So the reason I typed in these values to begin with was to make sure that I had the model of that clearly in my head. So in this spot right here, I'm going to do something that's very similar to
So where did you put the email? You put it right at the end after
so
phone?
here we're setting
or the-
text. Now we want to get
both
text,
fields?
right?
Okay.
This is our get string. But here we want to get text, not set text. So I'm going to say something like, for ID, it'll be txt ID, and then we're going to do get text with parens, and then we're going to do the trim to make sure we don't have any junk going in. And then on either side of this, so this is replacing the 1, 2, 3, right? But we need to concatenate it to the string. The string technically needs to be terminated with a double quote, the concatenation mark, a concatenation, and a double quote. So you see the procedure there? That is going to be a little bit uncomfortable initially. To make sure, basically, we don't mess that up. Because now we need to continue our string in very much the same fashion. So this is the double quote, single quote, comma, single quote, double quote, concatenate. You guys catching this pattern? And what I'm trying to do is get all of these to sit in the same spot in my code. so it's easy to replicate. So once again here for last name, I'm going to basically copy this approach. And I'll tell you what, this is probably the hardest part of it right here. Then once again, we're going to concatenate. And we're going to come out of it just the same way we did before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and put it here. Oops. Yeah, this is kind of a mind bender, isn't it? Right? And I'll tell you what, there's a good chance I'm already messing it up, honestly. So I'm basically now going to just start copying this. Say that again? Oh, because I was testing you. Yes, again, I was testing you again. A plus on the final just because you caught a mistake? No. That's an automatic F. Yeah, it's pretty harsh. Okay. That's what code does to your brain, you know. Oops. And the next thing is middle. The next thing after that is address. See what if, assuming the pattern's right, once you have the pattern, you can keep replicating it. It's not that bad. What would be next? City. State. What's after that? Phone. And finally, email. And then how do you end it? Well, we still have to add back a, how would we end it? We would put in a double quote to restart the string, a single quote, and I think that's it. Oh, no, not just a single quote. We also have to put in, to close our SQL statement, a closing parenthesis and a semicolon. Now that's a little bit of work there. And really, in a nutshell, this is probably the hardest part of the whole thing. Oh, and then we also need a semicolon to close the Java statement. I'm not sure what you guys are saying, but I'll try to ignore it. So, all right. All right, so this is the part that will take the information from the text fields on the screen, insert those values into a SQL statement. Now we need to execute the SQL statement. That's the next step. Now, just like we did before when we executed a SQL statement, we're going to do a try-catch. So it's not going to exactly be this, but I am going to copy the approach. And we are going to send in a query statement, so this part's going to stay, except instead of executing a query, we are actually executing an update. So it actually uses the SQL terminology. And then what are we sending to it? The insert query. That's the string we just created above. We don't need to load fields, because we're inserting. Stuff's already in the fields, right? And then it might not be a bad idea to also say an error. If it fails, we don't want our application to crash, so we're going to say insert failed. Now, I'm looking at my old code here, mind you, and I'm thinking that, no, I didn't do it wrong yet. If the statement succeeds, right, we're assuming it's going to succeed, we should also probably put in something to indicate that it succeeded. And that might not be a bad spot for it. And it does not need the extra stuff. All right. Really, we only have one method left to write. I'm actually going to comment out the one that we haven't built yet. And I'm going to run this application because we really have two parts of it already built. I have the ability to insert a record, and then if I can insert one, then it should be able to view it, right? All right, so let's cross our fingers and hope that our statements are correct. So kind of that moment of like waiting for all the debugger to throw stuff at me. It didn't. I'm very thankful. All right, we just had a real quick question about where do we connect to the database, and then I want to show you that after I launched, notice that the console is still giving me the messages that I put in there. So it says driver loaded, database connected. We have an established connection. Now, we know from being able to look at the database directly that there's no data in there. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to use the form to type in some data, and I'm just going to go 111. And now, see what I'm doing here in my mind is I'm like, okay, so what kind of field is telephone? Oh, it's characters. Okay, so we're fine. 10 characters, so I can't have any dashes in the phone number. See what the issue is? And then an email address, which is just characters also. So let's use some junky email address. And now I should be able to hit insert. Here's like I'm crossing my fingers and wincing a little bit. Insert. Insert. Did it work? I don't think it worked. Well, let's go back and I'm sorry, can you say that again, Nick?
We can't tell it from right here, can we? We'd have to actually go into that table and look at it, right?
Yeah, that's one way. Or we can go back to the program and see what errors are being thrown when we click on stuff.
We're going to do a button on click. I don't know if we needed that.
All right, well, it's not liking what we did. So we are throwing an exception. And it says Java line 151. It doesn't like the lambda expression apparently. So let me just click here and see where it's taking us. Execute, update, insert query. And it's also not liking the insert. Yeah, so we've got a little bit of tracking down to do. So first thing I'm doing is I'm looking at the naming of the object. So button insert, that looks fine. it's going to trigger something called insert. So I'm going to come down here and take a look at that method. This looks okay. I think all my curly brackets are balanced. Let's actually go look at the database. I think it's worthy of taking a look. Yeah, and from what I'm seeing, there is nothing. Oh, you know what though? I'm not looking at mine. I'm looking at somebody else's.
I'm looking at mine.
Okay, so let me look at my version of it. Let's look at staff. Yeah, and that is indeed empty. So now we're going to sit there and try to decipher some of these messages that we're receiving. So it is throwing an exception. It's throwing the same exception. The actual error says null pointer exception. That's the actual. It doesn't like the insert. Well, that's very helpful. All right. So we need to figure out why it doesn't like the insert. There's a very good chance that we screwed up the syntax in our SQL statement. That's the most likely scenario. So what I'm going to do here is I'll go back to the code, and then I'm going to examine some code that I have that I know is correct, and then I'm going to see if I can fix what we have. Okay, so let's bring that code back up on the screen. We can actually stop it from executing. Let's leave insert right there. And I'm just going to pause, and I'm going to look at a solution I know that works. So I'm going through the process of checking all the way back to my database connection. And I think that we're okay, but one thing that we're noticing is this is underlining in yellow. And the reason it's underlining in yellow is because we're technically not really using that as a variable. And I think I'm seeing the problem. And I'll show you what the solution is here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to say, there's no reason not to output to the screen the fact that we're connected. So I'm actually going to have that pop up in the window. No harm done there. But yes, that underline is something, and thank you for catching that, Cindy Wu. Now we set up a query structure up above here called statement, but we never put anything in it, right? In our previous sample exercise, we did, and that was the connection part. Okay, so that has to be what the problem is, or at least one of the problems. So I called it statement, and that's going to be equal to the connection, and then we're going to do a create, that's lowercase though, create statement, and a semicolon.
Can't tell from here, can we?
Right. So now it should be able
We
to
can't tell
actually
it from right here, can we? We'd have to actually go into
that's
the
my
table and
thinking. Let's
look
go
at
ahead
it,
and
right?
save it. And let's try running it one more time. Fingers crossed. Deep breath. This is more than
We didn't do a
small
button on
application
click. I
upload
don't know
here,
if we
right?
needed that.
All right. So I'm going to type once again some information. 111 is fine. Here we go. Hey! It worked. All right. See, I got the message up here that said inserted record. Now the proof is in the pudding. Let's go to the database and take a look. Don't worry, I will go back. And it worked. All right. Huge step forward. All right. Well, I'll go back to the code. So basically all I really changed here is I added this. I also put in the status field that the database was connected. Yeah, so without this here, of course, the connection can't attribute itself to the database. So, okay, I overlooked that when we were building it, but now we caught it. All right, we had a little bit of like off video discussion about how to complete this last part, which is to build the method called update. This was challenging to write because really the key wasn't getting the syntax right. Now, when you do an update, there's actually a SQL command called update. And the answer to doing the update part of it is to make sure you put it in the right format for that update command. So clearly you're not going to say insert into, you're going to say update. Yeah, and what are you updating? Updating the staff table. And then how are you going to populate each individual field? You are still going to pull in the information from the form. You're going to do all this stuff. So these statements will all be present, and this weird syntax will all be present. You know, with the double quote, single quote, comma. Yeah, in fact, you can probably copy almost this whole darn thing, but you're going to have to tweak it so it's an update statement. And then you're also going to have to set it up so that when you are feeding the values in, that they go in the right way. The question really is, with this approach that we use here, where I put all the column names in, and then in essence all the field names in corresponding positions, they all matched up. But can you do update the same way? That's really the question. So one thing that you might want to do is actually pull up, let's see, SQL update. Let's see what it comes back with. W3 schools, of course. All right, so it says the general form is update table name, and then there's a set command, and then you say column 1 equals value 1. See, it's a little different. Column 2 equals value 2. We don't need the where clause, or do we? We do. Okay, so this is my hint to you. The where clause will match up with the ID of the record. Yeah, right on. That's exactly right. So I'm going to pause the video once again. All right, we're coming down to the decision that we're actually going to code it through. It's only going to take us a couple of minutes because we know it's not that far off. It's just a matter of getting that syntax correct. So I'm just going to basically copy this whole method. I'm going to change the name, obviously. I'm also going to change the name of the query. And I know that I'm going to do that here. Probably want to change this text. I'm taking care of all the really easy stuff first. Record updated. And instead of insert failed, we'll say update failed. All right, we already know that the command is update. What are we updating? We're updating the table called staff. And I can tell you right now, this syntax is not going to apply. So I am just getting rid of it. Hopefully you're okay with that. But the next statement is going to be set. And since it's a SQL statement, I'm going to just do it all uppercase. And I'm going to opt right now to do a little concatenation just to kind of make this stuff look neat. All right, so what I'm going to concatenate, and actually let's put the concatenation mark on the previous line. So we're going to come down here, and we are going to start with a double quote. And we're not going to worry about the ID field. We already established that that's going to be one of the last things that we're going to do. So now we're going to say set. And what are we going to set? So this has to be in the form of a SQL statement. So this is still going to be a string. We're going to set last name Oh, we got to make sure it's the way the database does it, though, which is camel case like that. Last name is going to be equal to, and remember, we're doing this in the form of how SQL wants it. It would be followed by a single quote, and then the stuff that comes in from the form. So to switch back to that, then we need double quotes to close it. You see I'm checking my syntax here really carefully. And then after we get that, we're going to need a double quote to reopen it, a single quote to encapsulate it, a comma to move on to the next thing, and then we have to say first name equals before we do. Okay, so that's the trick right there. Figuring out how these commas and single quotes go, that's the whole piece of the puzzle. And actually, I could actually just type it right here, honestly. I should be able to just go the field first name, and then once again I can go equal, single, double. Okay, so I think basically now we have the pattern. This is the pattern. Okay, so if that's the pattern, then we just have to replicate it. So this stuff at the end of the line is all going to stay the same. This is going to stay the same. So really, right where my cursor is right now, we're just going to be inserting the field names that match. So with the middle initial, the field name is MI. So MI equals address equals city equals that one I remember for some reason. And then at the very tail end of this, we still have one piece of work we have to do. Because after we do the email, we're going to move to the next line. And we're still going to do double, single. I got to think this through. Double. And then we're going to say where ID equals, and then we'll do single double. And this is where we add the ID field into the mix. But I had deleted that before, but I can come back up here and get it from there. So that'll go, wait, we don't need a double quote there, do we? Sorry, the cursor was still up above. So where ID equals double quote has to be here. And then the field name, get ID. For text ID, get text trim, that's good. And then we need to finally close our statement. So I'm going to pull this stuff back up. We do not need the parenthesis in there. We do need the double quote. Actually, we need a concatenation mark too, don't we? Do need the double quote. We need a single quote. We can get rid of that and that. And I think that's okay. Now this is the silly part of it. I'm going to go to W3 and see if there's where some column equals some value, okay. I have the semicolon at the end, so I'm assuming that I need a semicolon right here. All right, now it's time to live large and see if it works. All right, now I got to make sure that this is not commented out. All right, that's a good sign. Let's save it. Let's give it a try. And with any luck, we're done. All right, so here's my troubleshooting mind. It's like, let's take a look at the table. Aha, we do have that record in there. It's stuck, right? So one thing we should be able to do right now is type in 111 and click View. Okay, that worked. Whew, right? Let's click Clear. That clears all the fields. Does not clear the database, though. It just clears the fields. Let's create a new record. 222. Now I'm just throwing in junk, just so you know. I'm doing an insert. Aha. Insert failed, truncation. What did you say? I have to have the phone number? No, it's the state column. Yeah, in the database, the state column's only set up for 2 characters, and what did I put in? 4. So let's do insert. Okay, it worked. Now I want to do an update. This is the one that's tricky, right? I already have 222 in the field, right? Now I want to change the state from AS to WI. And hypothetically, it should do it. Okay, it says record updated, but let's check the database to be sure. So I'm going to actually refresh this page that shows the database entries. And it worked. All right, folks, I'm calling that an application. I know that that was a challenging one. Let's do a really quick review of all the code for all the code copiers at home. So every time I click the mouse here, you guys should be pausing the video. Whoever's copying the code.
Yeah, I just want to see that last part, the where I need part.
Yep. All right, I'm going to stop the video here, folks, but that does complete this first exercise out of 3.
Yeah, I just want to see that last part, the where ID part.